shot clock.
There we go. Are we counting backwards?
Yeah, I'll count you backwards.
Yeah.
5 and I'll just count.
Oh yeah, no, I was actually talking about on the time. Yeah, let's. Yes. So can you give us 140, 20, 40? Can you give us 40 minutes, please? Yeah. Thank you.
You guys just mind telling me breakfast?
I didn't eat breakfast this morning.
Gotta catch up on work stuff. Everything's good though?
Yeah,
Macaroni and
I got
cheese.
it. My day was super busy. I had an hour and a half board meeting, and then I got another meeting after this, and then I got to record again. So.
Okay, let me just close those doors.
Is the water in the shop?
Yeah. It's going to be in the wide shot. It's not going to be in...
Should we move it, or can we keep it here?
In the wide shot, you can keep it there. In the close-ups, it's not going to be in the shot.
Okay, got it.
I'll start it as soon as you're rolling.
Yep, I'm rolling.
Slate.
Count me down from 5.
Yeah, you just come to slate.
Just back up for sinking.
Oh, slate.
Everything's going?
Count up.
Yep, 5, 4, 3, 2.
What's up, y'all? This is your man, Louis L. Reed, back with another episode of Illmatic Podcast, Surviving Beats, Overcoming Breaks. We are here with a very, very special guest, my man, Mamelo, the number one attorney in my mind. If you are in the city of New York, if you are in the state of New York, none other than Jason Goldman. What's up, brother?
What's going on? Glad to be here.
Yeah. I'm excited to have you. So look, I went on a few social media platforms. I told some folks that I was going to have you on, and the first thing that people wanted to just jump on about was the YSL trial.
Oh my God, yeah.
We know that you are not obviously one of the practicing attorneys on that case. That case is in Georgia.
Yep.
But if you could explain to our listening and viewing audience, explain to us like a 4-year-old, kind of like what's going on with that case.
I'll try. It's hard to explain to a 4-year-old. It's complex. I mean, first off, it's taken so long. Jury selection was like 10 months, which is unheard of.
Jury selection was 10 months?
Alone last year. It took forever. We all thought the trial was underway. They're still picking a jury. So
I actually was on pre-trial for about 10 months, let alone, I can't imagine going through jury selection.
So jury selection was forever. Tried to explain it to everybody. A lot of defendants, a lot of defense attorneys, kind of like a big RICO gang type of conspiracy where they can say...
What exactly is RICO?
I mean, look, in a very general form, RICO it's a fancy word for a gang, right? And they used to use it for white-collar prosecutions, for mob prosecutions, and they've used it now for more traditional gang prosecution. So if you're number 20 in the gang and you're on a text message thread with everybody else and all the others are committing crimes, you could be prosecuted for a lot of those crimes. So that's kind of what the web is here. And then more recently, I think in the news has been information about Thug's lawyer, having an issue with the judge. The judge is very corrupt down there. There were meetings behind closed doors between prosecutors and the judge. And according to like the rules of court, you can't do that, right? Like, no, absolutely not. It's an ex parte communication. They were pressuring a witness who didn't want to cooperate into testifying. It was a huge issue. Now the trial's on pause, and another judge is deciding if the trial judge should recuse himself. The trial judge had already thrown Thug's lawyer in jail.
Yeah. Can you imagine?
Crazy. He's everyone's hero.
Yeah.
He's everyone's hero in my community. So getting a lot of street credit for this one.
Yeah, definitely. So when I think about, I just wanted to jump right into that. Like, we just going to jump straight off the deep end. But let's take a few steps backwards. Let's talk a little bit about your career, what it is that you're doing, and how you actually got into like criminal defense work. And what was it like growing up, like for you?
Growing up, nothing led me to this world at all. I didn't know what criminal defense was. I wasn't involved in any way, shape, or form. I didn't know anybody that was prosecuted or went to jail, really. Had no idea.
And where you grew up at?
Long Island.
Okay.
Fast forward through college, same story. And then towards the end of college, I decided to go to law school, thought about being an entertainment attorney or an agent.
I can almost see you as an agent, though. Like
something sports or talent agent, which I'm still interested in. And then the first year of law school, instead of paying attention in class, I started to read articles, and I started to pick up on trial law and actual criminal trials, and that was a whole different world to me. And then I would stop going to class, and I would go down to Center Street and watch some of the legends like Jerry Shargell, Ben Braffman, some people I look up to, and I'd watch them on trial, and I was fascinated. And I was like, what is this world?
Yeah.
And after that, I just zoned in on becoming a trial lawyer. I became a prosecutor for a couple of years.
Wait, you were a prosecutor?
Yeah, out of law school.
Talk to us.
Don't kick me off the podcast.
Yeah.
Come on.
Security.
Don't kick me off.
No, talk to us about what it's like for you.
You have to cut your teeth, right? It's like being a defensive coordinator on one team, and then a few years later, you're the offensive coordinator on a rival team, right? So you see the other side of it. So I was a prosecutor in Brooklyn for 4 years. Great first job out of law school. You're in court on the first day trying cases.
Are you serious?
Yeah, and you're given files and you're picking juries and you're just cutting your teeth on stuff, and it's the best. I tried a case on a turnstile hopper. It's the lowest level. It's the lowest level stuff.
So the state of New York actually expended financial resources to go to trial for someone who hopped the turnstile.
Yeah, and you can imagine I looked like the jackass up there trying the case against him. The defendant was asleep at the table. It was a not guilty verdict. It was a mess of a case. The guy had a long criminal history, so my higher-up said that we couldn't just outright dismiss it. They were trying to give him a violation and a day of community service, and he said no.
Yeah.
And I was stuck completely.
How long was jury selection for that?
It was like 2 days. They were looking at me like I had 8 heads. And what you just said is what the defense attorney said. I can't believe the state of New York is going after this guy. Don't we have better things to do? And there I was, tail between my legs. So it taught me to just be in front of people, be in front of a judge. And, I did that for 3 or 4 years. Fast forward, I left the office. I worked for another defense attorney during COVID for a few years. And then I branched out on my own. I have my own practice now. And each and every day and each and every night, I'm just defending people.
So I'm curious about when we think about attorneys and criminal defense attorneys and even prosecutors sometimes, we have this law and order stereotype in our minds. What is it like to actually be in trial?
Well, to be in trial, I mean, look, it's not what you see on TV, obviously. In terms of theatrics, there's no real surprises. You know who the witnesses are. You have an idea of what the testimony is going to be.
So there's no one kind of like coming in from like the back door to say, no, I did it.
No.
Okay.
It doesn't happen. And we tell them that during jury selection. We say, look, you're not going to see like TV where someone gets up and confesses to the murder on trial. But there are some surprises, and that's what makes it fun. And part of being a good lawyer, I think, at trial is listening. You listen to the witness because we think we know what they're going to say, and they might give us an answer that leads us down a whole nother road. I just had this happen a few weeks ago, and it became one of my main themes of trial. It was a attempted murder case, and the complaining witness, the guy that claimed that he was almost murdered, gave me a great answer. And I ran with it as my theory for the rest of trial, and we won the case. So you really got to listen at trial. You have to be on your feet. You have to relate to a jury, right? So picking a jury in Manhattan is different than the Bronx. It's different than Brooklyn. How so? The demographic's different.
It's not a jury, your peers.
Manhattan's the trickiest because Manhattan, you get people from Tribeca. You could imagine what financial range they're in and what they look like. And then you get people from Harlem, and they're on the same jury. Bronx and Brooklyn, a lot of people look the same. Brooklyn's more diverse now, but you got to be on your feet. And I think whether it's the YSL trial, whether it's me on trial in New York or someone else on trial in California, being a trial lawyer is like a different level of really just adjusting, of being finesse in court, knowing how to speak to a judge, knowing how to come off to a jury because they're watching your every move. They're watching your client's every move.
Yeah.
So you got to react the right way. I mean, the optics are everything.
Yeah.
And on the defense side, I try to victimize us. I say the United States is against us right now. This is a very lonely chair to be in.
I don't know if you should be talking tactic right now because people are going to be watching.
Give away all my stuff.
Don't give away.
No, but right away when I go up there in front of jury selection, the first thing I say to them, if the judge cuts me off right now, what's your verdict? Guilty or not verdict? Or guilty or not guilty? What's your verdict? What's yours? And they say, I don't know yet. I got to hear the evidence.
Yeah.
And I say, I don't know is the wrong answer. It's not guilty. He's presumed innocent. You haven't heard anything yet. He pled not guilty, right? So we hear this term like presumed innocent and not guilty.
And what's the difference between innocence and being not guilty? Because people say, I'm innocent. And
look, not guilty comes into play where, you know, in very tricky cases, we as defense attorneys want to lean into the burden. We won't get too technical, but they got to prove a case beyond a reasonable doubt. So sometimes to a jury in more of a close case, I'll look at them in closing argument and I'll say, look, if you go back there and you say, I think he's guilty, your verdict's not guilty. That's not beyond a reasonable doubt. We don't have to prove innocence. It's their burden to prove this case to you beyond a reasonable doubt. And if you have a reason to doubt their case, your verdict's not guilty. And that's very tough for people because we want finality, we want black and white, we want to know the truth. And I say the truth might still be out there. Your verdict's not guilty. So that, in turn, is when we argue to them the reason why the burden's so high is because he's going to jail if you find him guilty. So you better be sure of it. This isn't a game, right? This isn't, oh, I believe he did something wrong, I'm going to convict him. Hell no.
So I'm interested in my mind is racing 1,000 miles an hour. So one of several things. Number one, when I think about someone like you, I know you personally. I know where your heart is. I know where your passion is. I know how you, if I call you at 2:00 in the morning and say, hey, I need a favor for this guy, the favor is going to be executed without question. When I think about cases and people who want a private attorney versus a public defender. Tell us what the difference, because people don't realize that there is, like, public defenders are actually attorneys.
Of course they are.
But that we call them public pretenders.
No, that's they get a tough knack. I always say this. I say they're my heroes. They're the ones that do this job, and they get paid so little. I get paid a good amount, and I still complain, and I still have it rough. I can't imagine them, because you know how you call me at 2 a.m.? Not that you're a paying client. I would never charge you, but even my clients that obviously do pay a good price for me, it's still 2 a.m. in the morning, and I'm still like, this is insane. Imagine being a public defender and dealing with that and making $50,000 a year in New York City and having 200 cases. I have 20 cases at a time, and that's a lot of juggling. So they're my heroes. They're great attorneys. The reason that they get fired, quote unquote, a lot of the time, and people say, I want a private lawyer, is because, yes, I can give more attention to somebody when I only have 20 cases and they have 200. But anytime a potential client says to me they don't know the law and they're bad, I say, they're actually really great attorneys. It's hard to get their attention because they're busy. You get them on trial, they're some of the greatest lawyers I've seen. Great. Excellent in the weeds, excellent with the law. But as you mentioned, people that come to me, I'm like their therapist. Like, they're on the verge. I've talked people out of suicide. So it's more than just in court. My job is holding their hand. My job is speaking to their family members at midnight. It's answering the phone on Saturday morning when I'm with my own family. That's what people want to pay for beyond just the lawyering. So that's kind of what private counsel is.
Got it. And so when you think about when you said the suicide piece, talking people out of suicide, I remember after I did 14 years in federal prison, I was at the mayor's office in the city of Bridgeport. I was the first reentry director there. I'm rearrested in part for child support arrears that accrued while I was incarcerated. I go to our local beach, take some over-the-counter sleep aid, was going to ingest it, and compose a text message to all my family members and friends. And it was my faith that kept me buoyant during that time, but also what I didn't talk about publicly is how I had a conversation with my attorney. And when I reached out to my attorney the next day after I got my bearings, he told me something. He said, this too shall pass. He said, Lewis, you did 14 years in federal prison. This too shall pass. This moment is a microcosm compared to the larger things. And so when you're talking about a public defender that has a caseload of 200 to 1 ratio versus a private attorney that has 20 to 1 ratio, in effect, you're paying for a degree of comfort as well.
Absolutely. I mean, that's half the battle is the comfort, and half the battle is the more that I do this, the more that I've learned how to talk to people in that type of way, my own clients. I've had the same conversation with clients that are about to take a lengthy plea or a lengthy sentence, and I usually think about how old they are, and sometimes they're 25 or 30 or 35, and I say, look, if you're getting a 5-year bid right now and you're 30 and I'm 35, you can be out like that. We talk about how time flies. We just spoke about it before we got on, and I always say to them, I'm like, forest through the trees. I'm like, you're going to go in there, you're going to be strong, your family's going to be strong, you're going to have a relationship through a wall for the next 5 years, but your life's not over. It's not. And it's so easy for us to say on the outside now, but a lot of the conversation is that. A lot of the conversation is you got to go big picture. You can reinvent yourself. You can do so much with your life. And a lot of people that come to me, it's their first experience in the justice system, and they tend to be in the age bracket of kind of 18 to 35 for the most part, or 18 to 40. You have a lot of life left. Yeah. So that's part of it.
So let's talk about that demographic as well. When you were a prosecutor, you see a lot of black, brown, and poor white cases that come through a state's attorney's office. How does bring us into the minds of Minota, so to speak? How does race influence a prosecution in a case?
Well, it influences both sides a lot, because the elephant in the room, especially in, we'll give more specifics here, but in Brooklyn and Bronx, right? You have individuals and groups that have been more oppressed historically. And there's no getting around that, right? During jury selection, look, you want to listen to answers. You do not want to stereotype, because I've had people that look different than what I thought I wanted on a jury, and they ended up being my savior. But for the most part, if I have someone next to me that's a young black kid, I want black people on my jury. And that's the truth of it. I'm not afraid to say that, because they probably, sadly, have more experience firsthand, or a relative that knows what this feels like to be in the defendant's seat and to go to prison. I mean, that's the reality of it. So I 100%, we go in with these mindsets, and, that's part of the process. So it does play a huge factor, But as I said, the answer has to come first before the look, because that's the first rule of thumb. As I said, I've had people that look different than what I had in my mind for my jury, and they were the best for my jury. I had a cop on my jury one time in a Brooklyn case, and that cop was the holdout for a not guilty verdict, 11-1, and the cop was the one that said not guilty.
Wow.
And my client during jury selection was freaking out that we picked him, and I said, I like his answers, because cops know, and people at Rikers know, that not everyone's guilty. They know that. Especially, I've had some corrections officers on juries too, and they know that for sure. They see what happens at Rikers. So those actually tend to be good jurors, but it plays a huge part in kind of what we do. Race is a huge factor.
Yeah. Tell us about the funniest case that you ever had to prosecute.
I've had funny cases on both sides. I mean, a lot. From a defense standpoint,
or something like bizarre or unusual that has happened over the course of a trial, or while you were defending someone, or even while you were prosecuting someone.
Yeah, I mean, look, I don't know if it's funny, but just the most recent case I had that I mentioned, attempted murder, a couple of weeks ago. My client was found not guilty for good reason, for self-defense, and the quote-unquote victim went to go look for my client afterwards. He brought a loaded gun with him. And this is not a funny story. And he shot at a crowd where he thought my client was.
This is after the...
Yes, this is after the trial. He killed a migrant, and it was in the news, and the cops were looking for him on a manhunt. This was the victim in my last case.
Wait. Let me make sure I'm understanding the pieces. You defend a client who goes to trial for allegedly shooting someone. Your client is found not guilty.
Correct.
The person by whom he is alleged to have shot goes to look for him after the trial.
For revenge, yes.
For revenge.
Yes.
Shoots into a crowd.
Kills someone else.
Yes. And so now the victim is now being the defendant.
The victim is not the defendant because the cops were looking for him, and he got in a shootout with the cops, and the cops killed him.
What?
This happened a week ago. It was in the papers.
You got to be kidding me.
Crazy.
This is like a real live episode of Law and Order.
It's not funny, but this is why my family's like, should you be in criminal defense? Like, what if the guy came to your office instead of looking for your client?
Yeah.
And I'm like, I don't know, but it's always a wild ride. Every case is wild. I can find humor in a lot of the situations, the lighter ones, but most of them are, Look, most of them are serious, and you're dealing with erratic people in a very erratic time period. That's the nature of the business. It's the nature of the people.
And you see people at their worst, at their absolute worst, experiencing the poorest decisions sometimes that they've made in their lives.
Yeah, I mean, it goes back to the therapy thing. They're spiraling out of control. They're not thinking straight, and I say, let us, think for you, especially for clients that are in Rikers while their case is pending, because their mind is everywhere.
Yeah.
They're not eating well. They're not sleeping well. They're getting into fights. And for those clients, myself and the family really have to iron out and just say, look, we're the ones that are going to make some decisions for you because you're not thinking straight.
Yeah.
You're not thinking straight when you want to go to trial on a case that shouldn't go to trial, or vice versa. So, let me be your mouthpiece.
Yeah.
For some
your
reason,
voice of reason.
For some reason in criminal defense, the client wants to be very involved sometimes. So I tell them at the beginning.
Because we watch a lot of
I tell them at the very beginning, the first meeting, I say, on their way out after I got hired, I say, by the way, keep in mind the last time you went to a doctor or you got surgery, you didn't wake up from the anesthesia and tell a doctor, hey, doc, use this tool on my leg instead of the one that you're using, right?
Right.
So same thing for me. I say, I'll call you when I need you.
Yeah.
I appreciate your input, but these guys go home and they start going on Google and they say, oh, write a motion about this. I'm like, we went to school for this. I was a prosecutor for this. We know what we're doing. So, try not to interfere in the relationship a little bit and have trust in the process. So, that's part of it as well.
It's hard to have trust in the process when you've been so jaded by the system.
Yeah.
When I think about me, my parents being incarcerated when I'm 5 years old, I'm raised by my maternal grandmother. My sister gets shot in her face when I'm 13. We grew up in a time where you didn't cooperate with the police because every person that we saw in our community who didn't look like us was either A, police, or B, social workers there to take you away from your family.
Yeah.
I get shot in my chest, critically injured when I'm 14 years old. I have a host of cousins and friends, etc., who either were prosecuted, who either were murdered. And so it's hard to trust the process when it feels like the process ain't trustworthy.
Yeah, 100%, and that goes back a little bit to the public defender thing that I hear a lot, again, which is not accurate, but a lot of the times the client will come to me and say, oh, my public defender, they're with the government. They were hired by the government.
Right.
I don't want them.
Right.
I'm like, these people are very anti-government, very anti-prosecutor. I promise you're getting a real defense, but they think there's backdoor dealing.
And I to this day, I think the same thing. I literally had a friend of mine tell me the other day that he told his attorney, hey, if you have to make a deal, make sure that I'm not the one that you sell somebody else out.
Yeah, a lot of the times, and this cuts both ways, but if I get a call sometimes from a client that's outside of areas where I usually practice, like upstate New York, I sell them hard on that. I say, I have no bridges to burn up there. I have no favor banks. I'm like, if you hire me, I'm coming in guns blazing. I will go all the way up to the line with this judge and prosecutor because I'm never going to see them again. So that's a great defense. And look, it's the opposite sell is when it's in Manhattan or Brooklyn where I have a lot of cases. I get people being skeptical because I might have 10 cases with the Manhattan DA's office and my client might think that I'm not going as hard as I need to for them because I don't want to ruin my own reputation. And that's a valid concern. So, that's part of it too. I think that a little bit unrelated, but going to the prosecutor thing, I think that 90% of the issues in the greater system, which I don't know if we'll touch upon, could be solved if prosecutors were defense attorneys first.
Let's talk about that. Let's talk about that. What does that look like for you? And let's talk about the larger system.
It goes to what we've been talking about, which is for a prosecutor, my client is a number. He's a case file. He's intangible. They're not on the midnight calls. They're not on the crying calls from the son that's about to graduate high school and his dad's about to do a 5-year deal. The human empathy, that touch, is not there for prosecutors. There's a really good defense attorney that was in the Southern District. She was a federal prosecutor for the last 20 years, pretty big time. Became a defense attorney recently, and I saw a quote, she was mentioning one of her clients, and she said, for the 20 years that I was at the federal attorney's office, I never once walked over to the MDC and looked at the conditions there. And I go, you think?
Wow.
And if you did, maybe your 5-year offer would have been a 1-year offer.
Right.
You know what it's like in there. So the prosecutors, they don't know the difference between doing 6 months in jail versus 3 years. Just a number to them.
Yeah.
So, During orientation, they took us to Rikers for 30 minutes. Big deal. That means nothing. I think every prosecutor in my perfect world, it'll never happen, should be a defense attorney first for 6 months.
I love that.
I love that. And it would solve so many things because of that empathy touch. I just had a very emotional case a few weeks ago in Brooklyn where my guy ultimately had to, because we had no leg to stand on at trial. He had to take a pretty long deal. And it was longer than it should have been. And I was just trying for 2 years to get through to this prosecutor. Young, hungry prosecutor that wanted to go to trial. She knew that she had it in the bag, and she didn't want to lower the offer. And this guy was the most deserving. And that case kind of reinforced, she just looked at him like a number. She didn't know the insight, even though I tried to relay it to her. I tried to relay what was going on with his family and who he really is. And we put together these packages, all these things. Nothing translates over. They should be on the other side. They should hear the calls. They should be involved in the meetings. And I think it would change so much. We talk about progressive prosecutors and reform and things like that. That's an intentional move that could take place in a perfect world.
Have you ever had a prosecutor call you afterwards and say, or even tell you informally afterwards, to say, in retrospect, I probably shouldn't have made that offer?
No.
Never?
No.
Wow.
It happens, for what it's worth, if we do it the right way and we get a good prosecutor, and they have a lot of power, right? They're young kids.
And I tell people this, the most powerful person in the courtroom is not the judge. It's the prosecutor. The prosecutor controls the time.
They do.
And the judge, the prosecutor controls the charge, and the judge controls the time.
And a lot of them are young, like I was, right? 25, 26, 28 years old.
You think, wait, let's just talk about the psychology behind that for a second. 25 years old, and you have the power that you probably never had in your entire life.
Scary.
You have power in order to be able to overcharge, to undercharge, to dismiss charges, mandatory minimums, etc. You have that much power.
Scary.
Wow.
Yeah. It's a huge issue.
Yeah.
It's a huge issue. And that's exactly, you're right. The judge doesn't have as much. All my clients always say, can we show the judge this or that? And I'm like, they're really not involved as you think they are. I wish they were, because they're reasonable, mostly. They're older, they're around, and I can get through to them. But, these prosecutors, and I get it. I was in the office, I see it, but they have a lot of power. They're trial hungry, some of them, and wanting to go to trial means sometimes they won't lower the offer if it's the right thing to do. So, we deal with that a lot. I've never had one call me after and say it was too much. Sometimes they'll say it during the process and we'll get a better deal. There's good ones. There's a lot of good ones. And really? I don't think the ones, of course there are.
I got to tell you, man, well, let me say this. I do know a fair amount of prosecutors personally. And I don't know how their personal relationship with me and with other people that I've socialized with around them, I don't know how that shows up in a courtroom. Right? And so when we say good ones, I'm like, I don't know how that translates. I don't know how that shows up when that person is actually prosecuting the case.
It's tough and it's difficult to make sense of, because I've had prosecutors on one case and then I'll have them a year later on a different case, and they'll kind of act differently on one case versus another where I don't think they should. So I'm just as confused sometimes about how they approach certain cases. But, you can tell which ones kind of read the memos that we put into them, the character letters. And, this is all I do, right? You're kind of just battling and chipping away at these people and trying to kind of build the human behind the case number. And there's ways to get through to them, and that goes back to negotiating in terms of, a lot of the times I'll try to offer up, put them on probation, put them on this with a jail alternative. I'm a big believer I'm a huge believer in second chances, but to meet them halfway, prosecutors, I say, look, it's a different argument if it's the third or fourth or fifth chance for somebody. And I get there's issues with kind of recidivism, and that's not necessarily the client's fault, but I try to speak a prosecutor's language to get through to them. So I say, look, this guy has no criminal history. You got second chances are important, right? If it's a third or fourth, it's a different type of argument, and I understand where you're coming from. I'm a realist on this stuff. And even that case I just gave you an example of in Brooklyn, right? The guy took an 8-year offer. It should have been like 5. I didn't go in there saying, give him nothing. If I said give him nothing, I get it. They can tell me to go fuck myself. Sorry for my language. But I try to approach it reasonably, because I understand that there's victims in cases. I understand the system, and I get that they have a job to do, although I might disagree with a lot of it. But, you know, if I came in saying, give them 0 years, you guys are ridiculous, I get why they would keep the offer at 8. But 5 is not a slap on the wrist.
Yeah.
5's a long time.
Yeah.
And what's the difference at that point? 6, 7, 8.
Yeah.
Oh, by the way, in that case, the victim was uncooperative. They didn't even care what my client got.
Wow. And
so what are we doing this for?
And that leads me to 2 other frames of thought. Number one, it's supposed to be in the interest of justice and also in the interest of a victim as well, right? Especially when you have a victim.
Yeah.
And they said that there's no victimless crimes. So when you do have someone, when there is assault against another person or something to that degree, and the victim has no interest in the case, then it shouldn't be a deference to the prosecutor to say, oh, well, if the victim was here, this is what would be able to
of course not
satisfy
no way
this term of imprisonment or something to that degree, right? The other thing that I'm thinking about is how when we look at our criminal justice system, a lot of times most of us are prosecuted based off of our history. When does like a history not matter? Not matter. Like when, like how long do I have to be home and out of trouble? Look, I went into the courtroom a few weeks ago, and a guy, he had an extensive criminal history that dated back all the way up into the 80s.
Yeah.
Here it is. He hadn't had any issues in 15 years.
But they were bringing it up.
And they were bringing it up.
My case 2 weeks ago, my self-defense attempted murder case. So part of when a client testifies is we get a ruling beforehand about what the prosecutor can bring up in front of the jury about the person's history.
Oh, really?
Yes.
I didn't know that.
It's called a Sandoval ruling. It's very important. So if my guy is on trial for attempted murder and he had a murder conviction from 20 years ago, on cross-examination in front of the jury, they can say, isn't it true that you were convicted of a murder 20 years ago?
Okay.
So that's an extreme example. So in my case, my guy had no criminal history after 1993. And the 1993 case was a petit larceny, a misdemeanor. And the judge ruled that it was allowed in.
That was allowed in.
So a lot of the times at trial, we're taught to get ahead of the weakness, right? So in my direct examination, a lot of the time, we would bring up on our own before the prosecutor and say, by the way, Mr. So-and-so, do you have a criminal history? And he could say, yes, I was convicted a long time ago. I've done so well since then. And that's textbook. I didn't do it on this one. I just didn't bring it out at all. And the prosecutor, of course, because I knew that they would, the very first question, you're such an upstanding member of society, right? Yes. Isn't it true in 1993 you were convicted of whatever? And I waited. And then on summation, I looked at the jury and I go, you know how their case is weak? Because they had their second question about a 30-year ago shoplifting from Kmart. That's how you know that their case now is bullshit. Because they have nothing else to question about.
Kmart isn't even around anymore.
Flipped it on its head. Ridiculous. So there's ways for us to spin that.
Yeah.
I always bring it up. I say, they want to go into his history. That's how you know that this case means nothing. Or else they wouldn't have had to do that.
Right.
So, but yeah, look, they use these things against them. I agree with you that the history is brutal. I deal with a lot of firearm cases in New York, and a lot of the
and then you have the criminal possession of a firearm.
Yeah, you get bumped up on your sentence. And again, the prosecutors just view that person in a different light because of their case from 3 years ago. Sometimes rightfully so if it's a shorter time period because they didn't learn their lesson from jail, although that's kind of a fine line because jail's not really doesn't rehab you. So that's tough. The sealing laws have gotten better in New York where cases are sealed, but that's more for employer background checks. Prosecutors can still see it. So they don't really care. So look, I think prosecutors having a defense angle would be amazing for our society, especially on that lower line prosecutor level, because they would really just have that added empathy. I think the second thing to fix our system would be to get rid of the trial penalty. So
talk to us a little bit.
The trial penalty is easy. The trial penalty is my guy from a few weeks ago in Brooklyn, 8-year offer. If he went to trial, he was going to get 20. Why was he going to get 20? He was going to be penalized for going to trial. He was going to get a maximum sentence. So, and I argued this at a different sentencing recently, where it was a lower level case. My client was being offered 6 months jail before trial. We lost the trial. I knew we were going to lose. And the prosecutor argued for 2 years. And the judge knew about the 6-month offer before trial. And, I got very philosophical and I said, we throw out constitutional right to go to trial, to challenge your witnesses, to hear the evidence against you. Is it really a right if it's contingent upon the fact that you're going to get a higher sentence if you lose. That's no longer a God-given right. You give up that right now. It's a right to do those things and then not be punished for challenging your case. You should have the right to challenge the government to their burden, or else you're forced to take a plea when you might be innocent, which obviously is a huge issue as well. So a lot of people, we see this all the time in the system, people plead guilty all day, every day when they're not guilty.
I told someone in the United States of America, you have prosecutors have about, the government has about, what, 98% win rate? Because people take pleas. I said Michael Jordan and Kobe Bryant combined did not have a 98% shooting rate. And you're talking about two of the greatest basketball players in the history of the game. And so it feels like the system is just not for us.
It's stacked, especially the federal system, and it forces a lot of pleas. And because they have a lot of cases are tight, especially the federal cases. And when they know that they have the defense, every which way at trial, that's when they can force us, and that's when we don't really have the leverage. Nothing's better as a defense attorney than when we have leverage. When we have a good case, then I can wheel and deal. The tables are turned, and I can, reject this offer. I can do this. I can kind of dictate things. That doesn't happen all the time, obviously, but that's where it kind of equals out, and it's very fact-dependent, obviously. But the plea system is tough. The sentence system is tough. The juvenile system is tough. I had a very big case a few years ago. This was probably like my most emotionally charged case.
Talk to us about that.
Represented a kid that was part of a small group that stabbed. So he's a young black kid, 13, stabbed a white college girl in Central Park. It was all over the national media. It was a few years ago. There was an argument. They were like trying to rob her of her cell phone, something very small. And he stabbed her once, hit an organ. She bled out on the street. White college girl, 4 young black kids.
Oh, man.
And he was 13 at the time. And when we first took on the case, did it for free, for some reason, I had that prosecutor instinct. And I was like, this kid's an animal. This was a bad crime, and he's going to do a lot of time, and he might deserve it right away. And I just kind of just on the face of what I read about the case. And I've never done such a 180 once we dug at what his short history of life was, which was growing up in an extremely broken household. Parents had guns in the house. Parents were not there. He's carrying a knife around at the age of 8 years old. He has no supervision after school. And we put together a gigantic package for him to the prosecutors because they were trying to give him the maximum of the juvenile penalty, which was around 15 years, and we wanted less than that. And we really dug into his history. And, part of what we wrote was, if he grew up 30 blocks south on Park Avenue as opposed to where he grew up, which is in Harlem, none of this would happen, right? It was a product of the environment. And he was so young that he wasn't intent on being a bad person. He was born into an environment. He had no chance to form himself mentally. He had no supervision, and it was kind of a tragedy all around that happened. Part of what got to all of us was, we saw that in his history. He was part of the Fresh Air program, which is upstate New York, and they take kids out of the inner city. They put them up for the summer. We saw the pictures from that program. Happiest, luckiest kid ever. Smiling, swimming in a lake, eating ice cream. It was like very tough for me to see that, because I was like, oh my God, he had a chance. If he just had this type of supervision. And then he goes back to Harlem, and he was a bad kid running around and doing these things. So, that was tough because it was so high profile that the prosecutors didn't change the offer. And we had no case at trial. We would have got fried.
And does the high profile nature of a case, does that put pressure on the prosecutor in terms of not being able to move?
It does. High profile cases are interesting. They cut both ways. A lot of the time people see high profile defendants and they'll say, oh, he got out of it with his money. He got a slap on the wrist. That does happen. But honestly, that's less than the opposite, which is when prosecutors throw the book at a higher profile case because it's very political. The higher ups are involved. Justice is not equal. And I'm telling you right now, whether it's a celebrity, an athlete, or my client that was a kid but happened to be high profile, they actually get the book thrown at them a lot. Because they want to make an example out of them. It's an election year, all these different things, and they don't want to touch it. That case was a perfect example of it. And one of the arguments we put forth in the package was, if he stabbed a black girl instead of a white girl, would they have budged off of this case a little bit? And he said, no, we wouldn't. I find that hard to believe.
Yeah.
I find it hard to believe.
Yeah.
It had race element all over it. New York Post, you name it, going crazy with this case. And that was part of what we wrote in there. We go, look at us with a straight face and tell us that if he stabbed someone that looked like him, a young black kid or a young black boy, would he be getting the max? Would it be in the newspaper? Would it be a big deal?
Yeah.
Why is it a bigger deal right now? Tell us why it's a bigger deal. Because it still happens all the time. It happens in other cities, happens in New York, and that's going back to the race element. We're all humans. That was a great example of it, and we kind of walked out of the office and we were laughing to one another, the lawyers were, because like, this guy's ridiculous.
Yeah.
Can't admit it to himself. So, you know, that was a brutal case, and we had to visit him at the juvenile facility, and he had no real chance, and, you know, doing a longer sentence now, kind of growing up in that. Had another case with some race elements last summer, one of these subway stabbing cases, a young individual who's being assaulted by a homeless person on the subway, both black, stabbed him once in self-defense, and the guy died. The homeless guy died. And my client was arrested right away. It's pure self-defense. You know, and that one had some interesting race elements to it as well. And look, you know, his case, we got it dismissed in a few weeks, but he's still having trouble getting a job.
Yeah.
All the other consequences that you know about and that we speak about, because it's a lifelong sentence. I say it to prosecutors a lot too. I say, even if, it's just a year, I go, that 1 year is going to impact them for the next 10.
You know why? Because Google has a longer memory
brutal.
than the case that's in front of the prosecutor.
I know. I help clients a lot that are trying to do sealing motions and other background check, you know, things, and they say, look, the conviction's not even an issue for me now. The issue is that it's 10 years ago. And I still can't get a job. This is crazy. And it is. And it kills you with that. You know, some employers are great at kind of overlooking that, because it's one misstep in your life. You don't want to be judged by the worst hour. It's not fair to any of us. If any of us were judged like that, we wouldn't have our job. So it's a brutal reality, and they're in the spotlight and the microscope, and that's just part of so many issues with the system. But, you know, my biggest takeaway would be that hopefully there can be more former defense attorneys that are now judges, right? And you see that federally sometimes, which is great, because they know. And then, you know, if we can get some of the younger prosecutors, I think, to step in our shoes for more than a day, right? Don't just go to Rikers for 30 minutes, but, you know, be kind of on the defense team in a sense. If there's a way for us to do that, I think it would go so far in terms of these plea offers and sentences that we're also, you know, restricted by, to really change the system, hopefully.
And also the presumption that just because an arrest is made that the person is guilty.
Of course.
I have seen situations and circumstances where the police have arrested someone. You know that it's a bad arrest. You know that they've embellished on the police report. Like, we know it. We've seen it.
Yeah. That goes back to what I mentioned to you during the jury selection. So I'll say to jurors, he's been arrested. He's been indicted. He's being called the defendant by everybody in this room except for me. I go, raise your hand if you think he did something wrong, right? He had to. He had to get arrested because he did something wrong, right? And they'll raise their hands a little bit. I go, he's presumed innocent still. The same way, right? You drive on the highway, you see a cop pulled somebody over. And as you're driving past them, you look over at your spouse. Have you ever said, I wonder what that person's presumed innocent of? Right? I say it to jurors all the time, and they start cracking up. No, you say, what'd that guy do, jackass? So I say it to jurors, I say, you got to change your mindset. It's so natural for us. You see the handcuffs? Even though they put alleged whatever, we look over the alleged, and we say, oh, that guy committed a murder. This guy had a gun on him.
That's in fine print.
They didn't prove it. Arresting someone's easy. It's really easy. I can call right now 911 and probably get someone. It really is that simple. It's sad how simple it is. So it's a great point, is that an arrest doesn't and shouldn't mean that much to the general public. You know, you should be allowed to fight your case, but it's tough. It's you know, presumed innocent doesn't mean that much, unfortunately. It just doesn't. People get dragged around. They lose their jobs. They lose their families. And nothing's been proven against them. And then if they're found not guilty or the case is dismissed, I don't see anything in the paper. Why don't I see anything? Why don't I see anything?
JG, listen. You will see the most salacious tabloid-ish write-up of someone when they are arrested.
Yep.
When they're arrested, the moment that they are found
Where's
not
the apology?
guilty, where's the apology? Where's the retraction?
I say to my media people all the time, I say, one day I'm going to bribe you, you're going to write a story for me. I go, you're going to write a story about my client. I had a case a few years ago. Guy was found not guilty at trial, but he was prosecuted for 5 years. During COVID, a lot of holdups, 5-year prosecution until trial. He came to court 150 times. He was out on bail. I go, why didn't you guys write a story about how bail worked? It worked. He was in Rikers. He was released. He kept his job. He kept his family. He came to court every month at 9 a.m. for 5 years. And he was found not guilty. You guys should write an article tomorrow about how the bail system worked.
Yeah, it
never happened, right?
Never happened.
That's my third dream. So, these narratives kill us too, right? With the media, they kind of run away, and readers are readers, right? They're not lawyers. They're not informed. They're not part of our system. So, I try in my spare time as my hobby to inform people a little bit. It's not just the headline. Don't believe everything you read, and whether it's the New York Times, Post, Daily News, whatever it is. It doesn't matter, but, become educated. That bail example is a great example.
It is.
Because all people read is, this guy was out on no bail, and he did this. I go, what if he returned to court every single day? What if he didn't lose his kids in a custody battle? What if he didn't lose his job? What if he was found not guilty? Where's the apology?
There is none.
Right.
Yeah.
So that's part of the greater system, is let's just get people to change their mindset a little bit, have a little bit of compassion and a little bit of intelligence, and not be, quite frankly, not be lazy.
Yeah.
Any of us can read an article for 2 seconds. Why don't you dig a little bit?
Yeah. Last question. BG, I don't know if you know who BG is. BG was a rapper that was connected with Cash Money, Lil Wayne, etc.
Okay.
He's on federal probation. He recently...
I think I saw this.
Yeah, you probably saw it in the news. He recently was mandated by the United States District Court to submit all of his lyrics that he has intentions on recording to the U.S. Probation Office for review prior to release. A form of censorship, and also it feels like a form of like weaponizing, like in the YSL
lyrics,
trial. There's a case to be made, or argument to be made that the artistic freedom of, it seems like it's weaponized against us, black, brown, and poor white folks, right? If this was Van Halen, or if this was Grateful Dead, or something, someone of in that genre, I doubt if you would see a prosecutor saying these lyrics are to be taken literally, and that these people were set on fire as a result of these lyrics being put out there.
That form and that example, I agree with you 100%. If it's done in a proactive way, an affirmative way, your example is spot on. That's a form of censorship. It's just predicting that this person's going to commit XYZ because they're about to rap about it or talk about it. That's ridiculous. The one thing I'll say, this might not be a popular opinion necessarily, but I think a lot of judges, for what it's worth, they're allowing in lyrics at trial in terms of weight, right? So your lawyer can argue to the jury, you shouldn't give it this much weight because this is what they do for their art. And if it's not related to the case, then the jury should be persuaded and say this has nothing to do with it. And again, the defense counsel can turn it on its head to the prosecutor and say, look how desperate they are. They're bringing a song from 10 years ago about when he shot someone. It has nothing to do with this case. This case isn't a shooting. So I get it for weight, but look, that's a tricky argument to put in front of a jury. It's better if it doesn't come in at trial at all. I understand that. And the same thing goes for authors and books, right? I would hope to equal things out. Put it this way. I would hope that if an author, or if a white author was on trial for a homicide,
Stephen King.
and there was a connection between one of the books and what he was on trial for, that should be allowed in the same way. If you want to play level, right? It would be a big issue, I think, is when we see that example and it's not allowed in, but meanwhile at the YSL trial, every song that he's ever been involved in for the last 20 years is allowed in. So, the lyrics on trials and interesting area of the law. I think that prosecutors are trying to weaponize it. They're trying to kind of get after it. And, it's the same way. Look, it's the same way that they use Rikers calls all the times. I deal with that a lot at trial. And sometimes, again, a savvy defense attorney at least can maybe flip that on its head a little bit. You go the desperation argument. You say, look at them speculating, right? I had a case recently. They tried to use a Rikers call. I said, you know what? Let them use it. Let them use it. It came in, and it was so so trivial to the charge. I said, look at them fishing. I go, this prosecutor was in his office for 5 years at midnight listening to these calls because he was so desperate because the rest of their evidence sucks. Not guilty.
Yeah.
So, but again, that's a fine line. We'd rather it not come in at all, obviously, but defense attorneys have to adjust. We got to be finesse.
Yeah. Jason Goldman, you got the last word.
Well, thanks for having me. I mean, you're one of my heroes too. You
appreciate it,
you have a lot of empathy, more so than a lot of other people. And you've kind of seen the human side of everybody. You've been through a lot of stuff. So whenever you hit me up, I'm always happy to talk. We could probably go on for days, I'm sure. But hopefully each year you and I will continue to try to reach out to different networks and just, I think the exposure is big. I think the more people that we can reach, because we have our system. You and I know the same people, and those people know what we're talking about today.
Yeah.
But I want to reach out to kind of the greater masses over time, because criminalizing people in our society and the system, it impacts everything else.
Yes.
It impacts education. It impacts the economy. It impacts like the health of our country. So other people should care about it. People should care that the United States has 25% of the world's prison population and 5% of the population of the world. They should care about that because it creates these spirals. It creates huge issues. It creates cities like Detroit and Baltimore going underwater. We should want the health of our country, and it goes to that. So the more that we can reach out, I know that you try to do it, I try to too, but we go to a lot of these events and these organizations, and I find that it's almost too, not that we're doing it on purpose, but it's too insulated. I want to invite people that think, why do I ever need to talk to a defense attorney? Why should I know about this? This is why. I'm going to tell you why. Because you're whatever you care about in life, your kids, your bottom line, your finances, your taxes, it's impacted by our population. So.
Fair point. I often tell people that public safety is not the absence of crime, but it's the presence of opportunity. And I was on a news broadcast relatively recently, and they were talking about President Trump. And he has 34 felony convictions. How do you feel about that? Louis L. Reed. And I said, well, here's how I feel about that. I'm hoping that it cracks the can open for a broader conversation, that if someone who was the president of the United States of America can be convicted and still run for the most coveted office in the world, and still run, then maybe we should be talking about how we need to relax laws that prohibit people who are justice impacted from voting.
Of course.
Let's begin there, right? Let's begin.
100%. And you know what? It's bipartisan, and you know this firsthand from the First Step Act. That's what's funny about the criminal world too. It's bipartisan. So it's you can't be a hypocrite, right? Because people in Congress, Republicans, Democrats, they get prosecuted sometimes, and they're defendants. And all of a sudden, the law and order Republicans about Trump are all of a sudden, it's a witch hunt, he's innocent, all these different things that you might want to feel, which is fine. So it crosses it touches everybody. It touches both sides of the aisle, which is why you guys obviously succeeded in what you did. You can't just be immune from it with one defendant and then another defendant. You want to, put everything after them. So you're right. It's someone like Donald Trump or anybody else that has a conviction on their record. You should be able to move on with your life, get that second chance, actually get a second chance. That's part of the broader issue, obviously, with just getting trapped in the cycle as well, because we expect people to come out of jail, and what do you think, the first day they're going to go work at Goldman Sachs? It's like the door shut on them. A lot of them start recommitting crimes because they have to.
You're locked. Not only you go from being locked up to now locked out.
It's brutal.
Yeah, you go from being locked up in terms of having lost your freedom. Now you're locked out of opportunities. So what do you do?
I know. There's no good answer for it. The answer would be, get employers, again, get the masses to just overlook these things. There's so much more to the story. There's so much more to these stories.
We're going to have to come back for a second episode. Look, this is your man, Louis L. Reed. I'm here with Jason Goldman. Again, if you are in New York City, you need a criminal defense attorney. This is your guy. Illmatic Podcast. Until next time, surviving beats, overcoming breaks. We out of here. Peace.
Thanks, my man.
Beautiful.
Good?
All good.
We went into overtime. Had to.
It's cool. Jason got to get back home to his daughter.
On the moves.
All right, man. It was great.